"You don't belong here," he said under his breath at my wife's company party. 6 words that cracked open a 15-year marriage and nearly took down everything I'd spent my adult life constructing. Colton Briggs thought he was dealing with a pushover. He had no idea what kind of war he'd just lit the fuse on. My name is Elliot Dane. I'm 43 years old. For the past 12 years, I've been running my own consulting firm from scratch. No investors, no inheritance, just grinding. I help startups go from a napkin idea to a functioning, profitable company. It's hard work and it pays well, and I've never once apologized for being proud of that. My wife, Petra, works in marketing at Galveston and Morse, one of those mid-sized firms that handles corporate events and B2B public relations. We have a 7-year-old son named Cody, who is without question the best thing either of us has ever done. Or at least that's what I believed. The company event was held at the Harrington Hotel downtown, one of those venues with marble floors and chandeliers that are just a little too large. Petra had talked about this night for weeks. The senior partners would be there. Her career trajectory hinged on making the right impression. She bought a new dress, had her hair professionally styled, and spent the better part of a Saturday afternoon rehearsing small talk out loud in the bedroom mirror. I was proud of her, proud to stand beside her. That pride lasted 47 minutes. I was parked near the bar, nursing a club soda and watching Petra work the room. She was genuinely good at it, reading people, adjusting her energy, remembering names. It was one of the things I'd always admired about her. Then a man came toward me, tall, a suit that probably cost more than my first car. He carried himself with that specific kind of confidence that comes from years of never being told no. "You must be Elliot," he said, extending a hand. "Colton Briggs, I work with your wife." I shook it. His grip was unnecessarily tight in that way that isn't about friendliness at all. "Good to meet you, Colton." He glanced around the room, then back at me with a slow smile. "So you're the husband she talks about." Something about that phrasing, the way he said it, not warmly but appraisingly, made my gut pull tight. Apparently. He leaned in. I could smell expensive bourbon over even more expensive cologne. "Let me give you some unsolicited advice, buddy. This crowd, these people, it's probably not really your scene. No offense meant, just an observation." I kept my voice even. "That's so." He gestured with his glass, sweeping it across the room. "Look at how natural this is for her. Some people are built for bigger things. Some people outgrow the circumstances they started in." The way he said circumstances while holding eye contact with me removed any doubt about what he was doing. This wasn't awkward small talk. This was a message delivered deliberately. "Colton," I said quietly, "you have no idea who you're dealing with." He actually laughed. "Sure I do, Elliot. You're the reliable option. The steady guy who keeps the lights on while she figures out what she actually wants. But people's wants have a way of evolving." Before I could respond, Petra materialized beside us, her cheeks flushed from wine and attention. "Colton, I see you found my husband," she said, but the tone was off. Too bright, too performed. "Just getting acquainted," Colton replied, without shifting his gaze from me. "Elliot was telling me about his consulting work." I had said nothing about my work. That small detail affected me more deeply than the insult had. They'd been discussing me. Probably more than once. Colton knew things about me that I'd never told him, because Petra had told him. "The presentation's about to start," Petra said, threading her arm through Colton's. "Colton's been leading this campaign for months. It's going to be impressive." She didn't take my arm. She didn't look at me. I stood there in that ballroom with the chandeliers humming overhead and a room full of people laughing around me, and I understood, with perfect, nauseating clarity, that my marriage was already over. The only question was what I was going to do about it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my side of the king bed staring at the ceiling while Petra showered. She was humming something I didn't recognize, and that fact bothered me more than I expected, that there was music she knew that hadn't entered our shared life. When she came to bed, she was asleep within minutes, turned away from me, which I now realized had been happening for months without my ever really registering it. At 20 after 3, I gave up and went downstairs. The kitchen was dark. My laptop sat on the counter. Thoughts I'd been trying to suppress were now circling too fast to ignore, and one of them kept rising to the top. Petra had a second phone. She'd had it for almost a year. Told me it was for client communications, a designated work device, kept separate for professional reasons. I'd accepted that completely without question. She guarded it closely, and I'd never once pushed back. Her purse was on the hook by the front door. The second phone was in the inner pocket, still faintly warm, the screen dark. I hesitated for a long moment. Then I turned it over. The locked screen showed 2 unread messages from a contact saved as CB Colton Briggs. I tried 4 passcodes before I got it right. Her sorority pin from college, something she'd mentioned once in passing years ago. 4 digits. The phone opened. The messages had been sent just over an hour ago while I was lying awake upstairs. CB, tonight was perfect. The look on his face when you mentioned your trajectory, couldn't have scripted it better. Petra, you were almost too much. I actually felt a little bad for him. CB, don't go soft on me now. We've been over this. He's been an anchor around your neck for years, you know that. Petra, I know, it's just harder when it's real and not theoretical. CB, the Sedona conference is in 3 weeks. That's the moment. Everything's lined up. My hand wasn't shaking. That surprised me. I scrolled back further. Weeks of messages. Months, maybe. Hotel photos, private jokes at my expense. Plans that excluded me, not as an oversight, but by design. Then I found the voice memo from 2 days earlier. I pressed play with the volume turned all the way down. It was Petra's voice. But it wasn't a version of Petra I recognized. This one was relaxed, laughing, fully alive in a way she hadn't been around me in a very long time. You should have seen him last night trying to help Cody with his math homework, she was saying, clearly amused. Second grade stuff, and he's getting frustrated. I just kept thinking, how did I end up with someone so limited? I don't know what I was doing. Settling, I guess. That's what it was. I stopped the recording. Settling. 15 years of building a life together. And that was the word she'd chosen. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. Then I sat at my kitchen counter in the dark and let myself feel it, all of it, for about 10 minutes. After that, I opened my laptop and started working. I had built my business by staying 3 moves ahead. I analyzed risks others hadn't spotted yet. I helped founders navigate threats they didn't know existed until I laid them out on a whiteboard. I'd somehow completely missed the threat that was dismantling my own life from the inside. Colton Briggs thought he was dealing with a guy who'd fold. Petra thought she could engineer her exit on her own timeline, while I kept paying bills and raising our son. They were both about to be corrected. 3 weeks until Sedona. That was my window. I closed the laptop and started planning. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in 15 years of marriage. I canceled everything and followed my wife. Petra left at her usual time, kissed me at the door the way she always did, and I let her think everything was normal. I waited 10 minutes, then pulled out of the neighborhood and drove to the parking structure across from the Galveston and Morse building. At 11:25, Colton Briggs's black Mercedes pulled up to the main entrance. Not the side, not the back, the main entrance, visible from the street. Petra walked out 90 seconds later, not from the employee exit, from the lobby, like she'd been waiting. She got in his car. They drove to Belmore Park, the same park where Petra and I had our third date 17 years ago, the one where she'd told me she thought she was falling for me. I sat in my car 100 yards away and watched them on a bench near the fountain. Her head on his shoulder, his hand in her hair, the kind of familiarity that isn't new. I took photos until my phone storage complained, then drove downtown to see my friend Garrett. Garrett Wynn ran a private investigations and corporate security firm. I'd helped one of his startup clients survive a liquidity crisis 4 years ago, and he'd told me then to call in the favor whenever I needed it. I'd never thought I'd need it for something like this. I need background on a man named Colton Briggs, I told him, senior partner at Galveston and Morse, and I need a GPS unit. Garrett didn't ask questions about why. He was back with both inside an hour. The background report was worse than I'd expected. Colton Briggs had done this before. 2 previous companies over the past 8 years. 2 married women, both with their own successful careers, both in what he'd assessed as shaky marriages. Both relationships had ended in divorces that left the husbands in financial ruin. This guy's operating a playbook, Garrett said, sliding the folder across his desk. He targets women who are ambitious and underappreciated, gets close during work travel, isolates them from their support network. Then comes the financial angle. He's not just collecting relationships, Elliot. He's collecting assets. He flipped to a page with names and case summaries. Brendan Kohler in Portland lost his restaurant and primary custody. Neil Figueroa in Seattle bankruptcy, and a restraining order. Neither one saw it coming until it was too late. I stared at the photos of two men I'd never met who looked exactly how I felt. How do I overcome this? Garrett leaned back. You don't fight it emotionally, you fight it strategically. But you need to understand, this guy has lawyers, corporate backing, and a network. You go at him the wrong way and you'll end up like Brendan and Neil. I left his office carrying the GPS unit and the report, and a cold, focused anger that felt nothing like what I'd felt the night before. The hurt was still there, but it had moved to the back of the room, and in front of it now was something else entirely. That evening, once Petra was in the shower, I placed the GPS tracker under the rear wheel arch of her car. My hands were steady. The emotional phase was over, then I called my attorney. Patricia Hollis had handled my business incorporation in 2 contract disputes, and she had a reputation for being creative under pressure. I'd always hoped I'd never need her for anything personal. Patricia, I need to open a conversation about divorce proceedings. A moment of silence. I'm sorry to hear that, Elliot. Contested or amicable? Contested, potentially very messy. My wife is involved with someone who appears to have a documented pattern of targeting married women for financial gain. I have background material on him, and I'm going to need a comprehensive asset protection strategy. Her tone shifted, sharpened, focused. Come in tomorrow morning. In the meantime, don't confront her, don't move funds, and document everything you found. If there's an established pattern with this person, that changes the entire legal landscape. After I hung up, I sat down with my laptop and started building a timeline. Every late night at the office over the past year. Every unexplained expense on the joint account. Every subtle shift in mood or behavior that I'd rationalized away because it was easier than confronting it. The picture that emerged was humiliating in its clarity. My consulting business was valued at just under $800,000. Our home was paid off, another $450,000. Cody's college fund held $60,000. Petra was legally entitled to half of everything accumulated during our marriage. But there was something she didn't know, and something Colton Briggs had clearly not thought to check. On Patricia's advice 18 months ago, I'd restructured my business into a family trust. Tax and estate planning reasons. Cody was the named beneficiary. Petra had no claim over assets she'd never had direct access to. Colton had targeted the wrong guy. He was used to traditional business owners who'd built assets in their own names. I was a strategist who'd spent years helping clients protect themselves from exactly this kind of structural vulnerability. My phone buzzed. Petra, working late, don't hold dinner. I checked the GPS app. Her car was at the Ridgeway Marriott. I grabbed my camera and drove over. Colton's Mercedes was in the parking garage, 3rd level. I found a seat in the lobby bar with a sightline to the elevators and ordered a sparkling water. 2 hours later, they came down together. Petra was wearing the red dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. Colton had his hand on the small of her back with the easy familiarity of ownership. I photographed everything. The body language, the valet interaction, the way she laughed at something he said as they walked out. As they drove away, I noticed that I wasn't angry. Not in the way I'd expected. I was calculating. And when I calculate, I win. Patricia's conference room the next morning had the feel of a command center being activated. She reviewed Garrett's background report with a legal pad in front of her, making notes in 2 different ink colors. This isn't a standard infidelity case, Elliot. What you're describing is systematic financial exploitation. Briggs, is using his corporate position to identify, cultivate, and exploit vulnerable marriages. That has implications that go well beyond divorce court. She laid out the plan in 3 phases. First, move my business into an irrevocable trust with Cody as beneficiary and myself as trustee. Completely defensible. Standard estate planning for someone my age. The fact that it insulated my assets from a divorce settlement was simply fortunate timing. Second, restructure my personal banking. Minimum required balances in joint accounts to avoid raising flags, while my actual assets sat elsewhere. Document every joint expense from this point forward. Third, and this was the piece I hadn't expected. I've been in contact with 2 of Briggs's previous targets. Both have attorneys who are prepared to cooperate on a coordinated civil action. Conspiracy to commit financial fraud through orchestrated marital dissolution. It's not a slam dunk, but it puts Briggs on the defensive and creates a public record. Will that work? It'll work well enough. At minimum, it exposes his methodology to people in your wife's orbit who might otherwise never have questioned him. I signed documents for most of the morning. When I walked out, I felt like I'd spent the night fortifying a building before a storm. Whatever was coming, it would encounter something solid. The parent-teacher conference for Cody's second-grade class was supposed to be unremarkable. It was the same routine Petra and I had done every semester since kindergarten. 30 minutes with the teacher, a folder of sample work, a discussion about where he was thriving and where he needed support. Petra showed up checking her second phone, already distracted. I sat across from Mrs. Caldwell and tried to focus on what she was saying about Cody's reading comprehension. "Could we possibly reschedule this?" Petra said, cutting across Mrs. Caldwell mid-sentence. "There's something at work that genuinely can't wait." Mrs. Caldwell looked startled. "These conferences are important for... Elliot can handle it. He has the flexibility." Petra was already standing, already moving. The dismissal was crisp and public. A few other parents who'd been lingering in the hallway exchanged glances. As Petra moved toward the door, she nearly walked into another woman entering the classroom, Gwen Larkin, mother of Cody's classmate Owen. "Petra, I didn't know you'd be here tonight." "Just leaving, actually," Petra said, her voice tightening. Gwen's expression shifted, that particular look of someone who has information and is suddenly unsure whether the other person has it too. "Well, I hope things work out. It must be a lot to navigate." I kept my voice neutral. "What situation, Gwen?" She looked between us. Her face told me everything. "I only meant people have been talking and I just assumed..." "I really have to go," Petra said sharply. "About you and that man from your office," Gwen finished, because she was too honest to stop herself. "Someone saw you both at Belmore last week, and the photos got around." "I'm sorry, Elliot. I genuinely thought you knew." The room was quiet except for the fluorescent hum overhead. Mrs. Caldwell had gone very still at her desk. Two other parents in the doorway had stopped moving. Petra's face had gone completely white. I stood up slowly. "Thank you for being honest, Gwen," I said. "I appreciate it." Petra left without another word. I finished the conference, thanked Mrs. Caldwell, and collected the folder of Cody's work. I walked to the school parking lot and sat in my car for 10 minutes watching other families come and go. Normal families, whatever that meant. And thought about my son inside the building right now, playing in the after-school program, unaware that the parents of his classmates had been passing around photos of his mother. That was the moment something shifted from personal injury to something harder and colder. Colton Briggs hadn't just damaged my marriage. He'd dragged my son's name into it without Cody ever getting a vote. That was the thing I wasn't going to forgive. The call from Petra's mother came at 7 in the morning, 3 days later. Irene Wakefield had been closer to a mother to me than my own since the year Petra and I got married. I'd helped her son Declan navigate a small business dispute 4 years back. I'd sat with her in the hospital when Frank had his cardiac scare. She knew me. That's why her voice on the phone, shaking with a very specific combination of grief and fury, told me everything before she said a word. "Ricky, I need to see you this morning. Come alone." She and Frank Wakefield still lived in the house Petra had grown up in, a modest 2-story in the Lakewood neighborhood, with a garden that had seen 4 decades of patient tending. When I arrived, Frank was sitting in the living room in the chair I'd watched him fall asleep in during football games for 15 years. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. "Sit down, son." Irene brought coffee, her hands unsteady. "We know about Colton Briggs, Elliot. Gwen Larkin called me yesterday. She thought we should hear it from a friend." Frank's jaw was tight. "We confronted Petra last night, asked her to look us in the eyes and tell us what was happening. What she said made us both sick." Irene set down her cup. "She said the two of you have been drifting for years, that you don't understand what she's trying to build professionally, that Colton makes her feel like herself again." She paused. "We told her about the background file you shared with us, about the other families. She said I fabricated it out of jealousy." I said. I wasn't surprised. "She did," Frank confirmed, "called us gullible for even reading it." The betrayal had its own particular weight. Not that Petra had denied the evidence, but that she'd tried to turn her own parents against their ability to trust their instincts. Irene reached across and put her hand over mine. "We've known you for 16 years, Elliot. We watched you build something from absolutely nothing. We watched how you are with Cody. We know who you are. We know what your character looks like under pressure." Frank leaned forward. "Petra is our daughter. She will always be our daughter. But she is wrong. And watching her tear apart what your family is for this man, a man with his history, is not something we can support." Irene pulled an envelope from her purse. "We wrote her a letter. We told her that if she goes through with this, if she dismantles Cody's home for Colton Briggs, we will not be welcoming her back into ours until she's able to reckon with what she's done." I stared at the envelope for a moment. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking," Frank said simply. "We decided." Irene added quietly, "The college fund we've been building for Cody, we're putting it into a separate trust. Elliot, you'll be the sole trustee. Whatever Petra's plans are for her new life, our grandson's future stays with you." I drove home with something I hadn't expected to feel, that in losing my marriage, I'd somehow discovered the full depth of what I actually had. The house felt like a held breath when I walked in. Petra was in the kitchen. Her eyes were red. The letter was in pieces on the counter. She'd torn it open and apparently reread it several times based on how crumpled it was. "Your investigation turned my own parents against me," she said, not looking up. "The truth did that. Not my investigation." She turned around. "The truth. The truth is, you've been controlling and paranoid since the day you found out, and you went out of your way to poison every relationship I have. The truth," I said, keeping my voice level, "is that Colton Briggs has done this twice before. I have names, dates, and court records. He doesn't love you, Petra. He is using you to access assets. And when the assets are gone, he moves on. That is a lie you made up. Brendan Kohler, Portland, lost his restaurant, lost custody. Neil Figueroa, Seattle, declared bankruptcy. Both of their marriages were destroyed by Colton Briggs using the exact same approach he used on you. This isn't a coincidence. This is who he is." Something flickered behind her eyes. Not belief, not yet, but a small hairline fracture in the certainty. "You're just desperate," she said, but it was quieter. "Maybe, or maybe I'm the one person in your life right now who's telling you the truth." She didn't respond. I left her in the kitchen and went to check on Cody's school bag. The strategy meeting Patricia had arranged took place in a downtown conference room with the kind of acoustics that made even quiet voices sound deliberate. Across the table sat two people I'd been corresponding with through attorneys for 2 weeks, Lena Torres and Neil Chuang. Both had been through what I was currently inside. Both had come out on the other side. Barely. Lena spoke first, her voice steady and precise. "Briggs ran the same play on my marriage. It started with company events and traveled to business trips within 4 months. By the time I understood what was happening, he'd already gotten into my ex-husband's head about my ambitions and isolated him from the people who might have said something earlier. My ex never fully recovered from the financial settlement. He liquidated his business. Briggs's firm picked up 3 of his top accounts at auction 6 months later." Neil nodded. "The financial angle is the part people miss because the affair gets all the attention. He targets the divorce settlement specifically. My ex was convinced by Briggs to demand the portion of my business that made the whole thing unworkable. It wasn't vindictive on her part. She genuinely believed his advice was in her interest. She didn't realize she was being used as a mechanism. Their attorney, a careful, precise woman named Diane Osei, set down her pen. What we're building is a conspiracy case. The pattern of behavior: 3 marriages, 3 financially engineered settlements, assets that ended up in or near Briggs's professional network, establishes enough of a through line to support a civil action." Patricia spread documents across the table. "We've also found that Briggs has been accessing Galveston and Morse's internal databases under the pretense of client development. Credit background checks on the spouses, business valuations, financial exposure analyses. He was building dossiers on his target's husbands using company resources. That's corporate malfeasance on top of the fraud exposure," Diane said. "We can file with the state bar and the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies simultaneously." There was a short silence. Then Neil said something that landed differently than everything else. "I want you to know, it does get better." He said it straightforwardly, without decoration. "I know that sounds like something people say, but it's actually true. I started putting myself back out there about 8 months ago. Found a dating platform called singletune.com. Kind of unusual the way it works. It's not swipe and forget like the apps everyone uses. It's more like it actually asks you what kind of person you're trying to align with. Feels like calibrating something rather than shopping. I met someone through it who's just steady, real, different from anything I'd experienced in a long time. Lena raised an eyebrow. You and the website. I know, Neil said, almost laughing. But I'm telling you, after all of this, he gestured at the table full of legal documents, you start to realize that what you actually want is someone with genuine integrity. Not performance, not an impression, the actual thing. And that platform is built around that idea. I thought about that for a moment. No more guessing games. No more reading a room wondering what's real and what's a performance. Just the right frequency. The slogan was right there in the app's tagline, apparently, single tune, engineered for loyalty. Tuned for you. Once this war was over, I was going to need a way to find my people again. People whose word meant something, who showed up the way they said they would. Not the kind of search you do when you're still running on adrenaline and anger, but the kind you do when you finally come back to yourself. That day was still ahead of me, but it was no longer unimaginable. Patricia filed the coordinated complaint on a Wednesday morning. By noon, Galveston and Morse had received formal notice. Colton Briggs was suspended pending investigation within the hour. His corporate system access was terminated. The bar complaint was simultaneously submitted. And then the dominoes. By Thursday afternoon, Henderson and Morse, Colton's previous employer, whose name appeared 3 times in the financial trail, had received document requests from 2 separate attorneys. Petra found out about the suspension before I told her. She came home early with her face set in a way I recognized from years of watching her process things she hadn't expected. She didn't say anything at first. She sat at the kitchen counter and stared at her phone for a long time. His access was cut, she said eventually. Yes. They're saying fraud, corporate espionage. She looked up. Is it true? What's in those documents? Everything I've told you for the past 2 weeks is in those documents. With his name on it. She was quiet for another long moment. I believed him, she said. Her voice had changed. All the defense had gone out of it, and what was left was something smaller and genuinely bewildered. He was so sure of everything. He made me feel like the version of myself I'd been waiting to become. I know. He used me, yes. Tears came then, not the angry kind, but the kind that comes when the story you've been telling yourself collapses and you see clearly what was actually underneath it. I didn't go to her. I didn't know how. Too much had been said, and some of it could not be unsaid. But I let her sit there and have it, without filling the space. What happens now? She asked finally. Patricia files the divorce petition at the end of the month. We have a custody agreement drafted. I think joint works for Cody. I want him to have his mother. I want that more than I want anything from any of this. She nodded slowly. Your parents, my parents, your parents love you. They're not abandoning you. They're drawing a line. There's a difference. I found Colton Briggs at a bar called Copperhead on a Tuesday afternoon. He was nursing something amber at the far end of the bar, and he looked like the kind of defeated I hadn't anticipated. The suit was the same caliber, but somehow the man inside it had shrunk. Nothing like the figure who'd leaned in close at a hotel party and told me I didn't belong. He saw me come in, didn't move. I sat down one stool away and ordered a sparkling water. Elliot Dane, he said. Come to enjoy this? Come to close it out, I said. You told me that night that I had no idea who I was dealing with. I've thought about that a lot. He laughed, a short, hollow sound. Yeah. Turns out I was the one who had no idea. You were used to targeting men who'd built things in their own names and hadn't thought past the immediate financial exposure. What you didn't account for was someone who spends his career helping companies protect themselves from precisely what you were trying to do. He drank, said nothing. Lena Torres, I continued, Neil Chuang, they've filed civil actions. You're looking at years in court. The legal bills alone will take everything you've saved, and your license is under review. His face had gone pale. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to ongoing coordinated schemes. Your activity over 3 marriages constitutes a continuing enterprise. Our attorneys can connect the thread all the way back. I put money on the bar and stood up. You said that night that some people are meant for bigger things. You were right. You just confused exploitation with ambition. I buttoned my jacket. Now you get to find out what the difference costs. At the door, he called after me. What about your wife? What about your marriage? I stopped with my hand on the frame. That's between Petra and me. But you taught me something useful. I know who my real allies are now. I know what actual loyalty looks like. That's worth more than you took from me. Outside, Patricia was waiting by the curb with a sealed folder. Petra had signed the divorce papers that morning. Joint custody of Cody, alternating weeks. A settlement structured around what she'd legitimately contributed. Fair, not vindictive. Patricia had seen to that. She asked me to tell you something, Patricia said, handing me the folder. What? That she's sorry for all of it. I took the folder and looked up at the sky for a moment. It was a clear afternoon in late autumn, that specific quality of cold light that makes everything feel like a beginning or an ending, depending on where you're standing. It felt unexpectedly like a beginning. Colton Briggs was sentenced to 18 months for corporate fraud and conspiracy. The civil suits from Neil and Lena's attorneys ground through the courts for the better part of 2 years and cost him his house, his savings, and his law license. He moved out of state sometime the following spring. I didn't keep track of where. Petra relocated to Phoenix 6 months after the divorce was finalized. She'd found a job with a regional marketing agency, and genuinely good work from what I heard, and was rebuilding her professional life with some difficulty and a fair amount of honesty about what she'd let herself become. We talked when we needed to, about Cody, about logistics. Politely. Sometimes something close to warmly. Whatever anger I'd carried had eventually dissolved into something more like sadness for the choices she'd made, and then not much at all. Cody adapted with the resilience that kids somehow produce when they're loved by both of their parents, even when those parents are no longer in the same house. He asked fewer questions than I expected and more insightful ones than a 7-year-old should be capable of. He made his school play. He mastered the second-grade math that I'd apparently fumbled so noticeably. He started calling the apartment I'd rented my cool place, which I counted as a win. My business grew significantly in the year following the Morrison case, which had generated quiet industry attention. Other business owners who'd been through contested divorces sought me out specifically. People who needed a strategist who understood both the professional and personal dimensions of financial threat. I was good at that work now in ways I hadn't been before, because I knew what it felt like from the inside. 6 months after the divorce was final, a woman knocked on the door of the house I'd moved back into. Brown hair, a slightly nervous smile, and a casserole. Mr. Dane, I'm Lydia Voss from the Maplewood cul-de-sac, 3 houses that direction. I've been meaning to come over for a while. She lifted the dish slightly. I heard what you went through. My son and Cody are in the same class. The whole school parent network talks, which you probably know by now. I do, I said. I wanted to say I think you handled it with a lot of integrity, and that Cody talks about you constantly, which tells you everything. We talked on the porch for an hour. Lydia taught middle school history, had been divorced for 18 months after her ex-husband left, and was raising her 9-year-old daughter Nora on her own with the kind of calm, grounded tenacity that you either have or you don't. She was funny in a dry, understated way that I found I'd missed in my life without realizing I'd been missing it. Dad, who's the nice lady? Cody asked from the yard when Lydia headed home. New friend, I said. He nodded sagely, the way 7-year-olds do when they're deciding something. I like her. Me too, I thought. 14 months later, Lydia said yes. We had a small ceremony in Irene and Frank Wakefield's backyard, which had been, from the day I'd sat in their living room and watched them choose me, exactly the right place for it. They welcomed Nora into the family with the same ease and completeness they'd always brought to things that mattered. And Cody took his role as older brother with a seriousness that made everyone laugh and then quietly tear up. On the night before the wedding, I sat with Frank on the back porch while Irene and Lydia were inside talking. You doing all right? Frank asked. Yeah, I said. Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. You know, when all of this started, the party, the aftermath, all of it, I was worried about you. Not that you'd fall apart. I've known you too long for that. I was worried you'd come out the other side harder than you went in. Closed off. And? He looked at me sideways. And instead you're sitting here the night before your wedding looking about 22 years old. He shook his head, not unhappily. Some men collapse under a thing like that. Some come through it more themselves than they were going in. I thought about Colton Briggs telling me I didn't belong, about Petra's voice in a recording saying the word settling, about sitting at a kitchen counter at 3 in the morning with a cold clarity, replacing the hurt, building a plan while the house slept around me. He thought he'd broken something. What he'd actually done was show me how much of me was still standing. I'm grateful, I said, and meant it in every direction at once. The stars were doing their thing overhead, indifferent and permanent. Good, Frank said. You should be. Inside, Cody and Nora were arguing good-naturedly about something inconsequential, the way siblings do. Lydia's laugh carried through the window, clear and real and exactly the right frequency. I was home. People ask me sometimes, usually other men who've been through something similar and found me through word-of-mouth referrals from Patricia's network, what I would have done differently. The honest answer is not much in terms of strategy, but I wish I'd noticed sooner. Not because it would have saved the marriage, I don't think it would have. The problems were real and they ran in both directions. But because Cody lost a year of having two parents fully present in the same house, and that's a year I can't give back to him. What I noticed in the months after it was all over was how many people around me had been waiting for permission to tell me what they'd seen. Gwen Larkin hadn't wanted to be the one to start that conversation in the school hallway. Irene had waited for a phone call from someone else before picking up her own phone. Even Garrett, when I walked into his office, had asked no questions. But he'd pulled the file faster than I expected, which told me he'd been thinking about it before I showed up. The people who care about you often know more than you think. Sometimes they're waiting for you to be ready to hear it. That's the part of the story I try to pass on when someone sits across from me, with that specific shell-shocked expression I recognize from my own bathroom mirror. Not the legal strategy, not the asset protection, just the people who show up when things fall apart are telling you exactly who they are. Let them. Cody graduated from elementary school this past spring. He stood up on the small stage in the gymnasium in his tiny blazer and accepted his certificate with the gravity of someone receiving an Olympic medal, and then immediately turned and scanned the audience with the urgency of a search operation, until he found me and Lydia and Nora in the third row, and then he found Petra and her boyfriend 2 rows behind us, and then, only then, he broke into the grin that is purely and entirely his own. He found all of us, made sure we were all there, and then he was satisfied. That, more than anything else I could tell you, is the ending. I kept Garrett's background report in a folder in my filing cabinet for about 8 months after the divorce. Not for any practical reason. The legal case was long past needing it, but because it represented the moment I stopped being passive about my own life. It was the first thing I'd done that wasn't reactive. It was the first time I'd decided, deliberately, to understand what I was actually facing, rather than hoping it would resolve itself. One evening, Cody found the folder while he was looking for construction paper in the bottom drawer. He pulled it out with the curiosity that 7-year-olds apply to everything that looks official, and asked what it was. Old work stuff. I told him. He looked at the cover for another second, decided that was a satisfying answer, and went back to his project. I waited until he was in bed that night, and then I shredded the whole thing. It had served its purpose. I didn't need the reminder anymore. I'd internalized what it had taught me. Some things you carry until you don't have to anymore. And then you put them down. Lydia asked me once, early on, what I was like before all of it. Before the party, before the phone in the purse, before Garrett's file, and Patricia's conference room. I thought about it for longer than she probably expected. Quieter, I said finally, but not in a good way. More like I was quiet because I assumed things were fine, because I hadn't tested the assumption. She considered that. And now? Now I'm quiet because I've chosen to be. That's different. She nodded like that made complete sense, which is one of many reasons I married her. Some men break when the test comes. Some find out to their own surprise that they were stronger than anyone, including themselves, had realized. I was grateful and continued to be, to know which one I was.